Hello and welcome to the fifth. No, it's not the fifth. What's the matter with me? Okay, hello and welcome to the fourth episode of my podcast, the Misinformation Podcast. I am Z, the reluctant accountant, and I'm here to go through it with you again. Welcome. Okay, so we're here with the fourth episode. We've made it. We've got through to the fourth one. And I keep saying that every week. I'm probably annoying quite a few people. Good. I don't care. I made it through to the fourth episode. I'm proud of myself. So I hope you're proud of me as well. But this episode, I just wanted to touch on something that I've been thinking about for a while, to be honest with you. And it's about the media. And not just social media, but the media in general. And so this episode is entitled, Whose Byline Is It Anyway? The reason that I wanted to take this angle and look at the media, because I think we do a lot, right? So I think we, especially when in this age of social media now, I think that we've got so much information that's coming to us and so many parts of, news and opinions. And I feel there is such a difficulty that people are experiencing trying to distinguish the fact from the fiction. And if we look at the media, and if we, even looking at the definition media, I think that's a really good place to start, because I think that will help us to extrapolate and really look at what are the messages that we're getting and what is the impact of those messages. So what I want to do first, I think we'll again establish a baseline. So what is the media? What even is it? I want to look at who owns the media that we're consuming, especially kind of with regards to the UK, and what is the impact of that? What can be the fallout from this ownership? So the first thing is to look at media. What does media even mean, right? So when we say media, what are we talking about? So if we look at the definition of media, media is taken as a means by which information is communicated. And media is the plural of medium, which again is a form of communication. What is the medium used to communicate something? And I think that's really interesting, because what we've traditionally expected, maybe not always have got, but what we've traditionally expected is that the media is a vehicle through which this information goes from one place to another. So the information is here, something happens, an incident occurs, right? And the media tells us about it. And so that's kind of been that relationship. That's been that transactional relationship between us as the consumer and the media class, if you like. And I feel that there's been a very much a democratization of information since the rise of, the internet and social media in particular. And I say social media because I think that the fallout of social media is quite widely known in many ways. We speak about protecting our children from social media. We speak about misinformation. Indeed, that's kind of one of the inspirations for the name of this podcast. But I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper just on social media briefly, and then we'll get into the news. So stick with me. And the reason I'm doing this is because I remember many, many moons ago, when I was a wee bairn, when I was a child, I remember feeling hopeful. And I say that because I don't know that I feel like that now. And I don't know that a lot of people feel like that now. And it seems like I've just kind of got bitter and cynical with age. And that may very well be true. And you know what? Shout outs to me, because I always wanted to be a bitter, cynical old woman. However, I do feel that there's been a kind of shift in energy in the environment that we live in. And I think we're kind of almost accepting that we live in this dystopian reality right now. And so why I say that is because I grew up relatively poor. I grew up on a council estate. I had, free school meals at times, all of that kind of stuff. And so realistically, my experience of life now is far greater in terms of the privilege and the things that I can afford, and my position in life is a much better position than the one I grew up in. But I remember feeling so much more hopeful. And indeed, my mum possibly sheltered me from it, but I definitely felt like there was a hope for the future. We could do stuff. When it was time to close the ozone layer, we could do it, guys. We were there. We were like, yes, stop using CFCs and we're gonna fix this. Whereas now there are oceans that are on fire and we're like, well, I don't know. What can we do? So when it comes down to social media, I think it's a very interesting one. There are so many things that are coming out, and just kind of as an aside, if we look at it from the UK perspective, and there's a report that I will reference because I think it's a very interesting one, and it's who owns the UK media. And there's a report that was published for 2023 that really breaks this down. And one of the things in that report and what it says is 10 of the top 15 online platforms used to access news in the UK are owned by Meta, Alphabet, and X Corp, who are the owners of X or Twitter or whatever. So 10 of the top 15 are owned by these three organizations. That's kind of important. And I think that it's really important because when we're talking about this as a vehicle through which we get news, are we saying that this vehicle is just very neutral and it literally passes from one place to the other? Or is there a shaping of that? Is there a way in which this news is presented in order for us to believe a certain thing, or in order for a certain reaction to be elicited? So I'll leave that with you and kind of hanging with you. But I think it's really important. So when we're looking at social media, and we tend to kind of think about the impact that it has on children, I think that's an argument that's used quite a lot. You know, like, our kids are being susceptible to things. They're seeing things that they shouldn't have or shouldn't be seeing. Are we protecting children? You know, I know that, you know, schools are concerned about this. Now they're in the UK, they're talking about phasing out smartphones and all of these other things. And I think that's a very good argument. But I also believe that we're missing the fact that there is a very real impact that social media in particular, but not exclusively, is having on adults, just generally on people that are just kind of walking the streets. And I feel not only is this occurring, but it's also occurring and no one's really doing anything about it. Like, no one's really... Okay, let me take the UK, for example. So in the run up to Brexit, before David Cameron decided that he was going to, you know, make that his legacy. Good for him. Before David Cameron decided he was going to make Brexit his legacy, polls showed that actually membership of the EU wasn't a huge concern of most people in Britain. It wasn't like, that wasn't the top. It wasn't the top three, right? And so of all the things for him to think, let me fix this, he wanted to fix something that by and large was not broken. People didn't care. But you know who did care? The right-wing factions. The right-wing factions of the Conservative Party gave a damn about EU membership. And so because David Cameron was scared that those right-wing factions then would take themselves and go to kind of UKIP or whatever Nigel Farage's party was when it came out, he was like, okay, we'll just have a referendum about it. We'll have a referendum about it. And throughout that referendum, what you found was that people were just making any claim that they wanted to make. They would make any claim that they wanted to make, and the media, especially on social media, but not exclusively, would report that claim. There wouldn't be a robust investigation to see whether that made sense. There wouldn't be a, you know, real kind of interrogation of the claims and an expose saying why what they're saying is nonsense. We're just going to be like, you know what, there's a bus, we're going to get 350 million or whatever it is to the NHS every week, and let's print pictures of that bus. And that's what happened throughout that campaign to leave the EU. The real impacts of it were not really explained to people. If they were, and I put my cards on the table as a Remainer, if they were explained to people, they were explained in a way that wasn't accessible, in a way that didn't relate to them. And so, you know, people that are voting because they're kind of xenophobic or like nationalist pride or whatever, those people aside, there were real people that had real problems in this country, and they thought this would be the solution because we were in the EU and their problems weren't getting better. So if you don't explain why this intersection or that the fact that we're in the EU is actually helping you to not be in a worse situation, then you're going to go, well, I don't know, let's just blow it up and see what happens. And so that happened. You know, Brexit was just like the first, I think, real time when I saw at home in the UK, and I'm not talking about other places, but at home in the UK, that misinformation being peddled to such a degree and going unchecked. And even when it was checked, it was very quietly. Oh, that may not be true. But there were no real repercussions. There were no real consequences of that. And I'm also old enough to remember New Labour, right? So New Labour, New Danger. And I remember at the time, they had advertisements that it had like Tony Blair and like other politicians, and they would be like New Labour, New Danger, and they'd rip away the eyes, and they'd have like these evil eyes, like devil eyes or whatever, in these billboards. And I remember the advertising agency were like, you can't do, like, that's really bad. Like, that was bad. Now we have people just outright lying. But like back in the day, you couldn't even just say these people are almost like the devil. And that was deemed too kind of, that was really bad. They couldn't do that. So anyway, so back to this Brexit thing. So we had this kind of, stream of misinformation that was coming out by politicians that also now probably would, we lied and we just said these things. No repercussions. But again, looking at the media, what is the role of the media if not to afford some sort of checks and balances? And that wasn't coming through. It wasn't coming through. Also within that referendum, there was known Russian interference. So we knew that Russian bots or Russian state, or there was interference. That is something that our intelligence agency have said, yes, that occurred. Again, no repercussions. And I've spoken a bit on episode 2 about our love of Russia in this country. So maybe that's why. But here we are. So we're looking at social media, and we're looking at like this role that they can have directly in interfering in the outcomes that affect individual citizens in this country. So if we're going to look at that, we also need to look at two things. We need to look at, okay, we've got these owners, and what do owners care about? Corporations, these big corporations that own social media, they care about making money, as all corporations do. That's what their main focus is. And so if they care about making money, they don't care about how that's made. If a lie spreads quicker than the truth, then spread the lie, because that's how they make their money. And because we have this 24-hour news cycle, because we have this need for traditional media to try and, well, we don't, but they try to keep up with social media, which is almost instantaneous, we don't have the checks and balances, and we don't have the journalistic rigor that we would expect from the traditional newspapers, because they just are happy to report anything that pops up online, and nobody's going to do like the research that is needed for us to get to the truth. So when we look at that, and I feel like online media and social media is one thing, and we expect it to be very microwave, very, quick, instantaneous. Whatever opinions people want to spew out, whatever they want to say, they can do it, and they can tweet it in a second, and that can go viral, and it does whatever it needs to do. We expect that. But there is still, I think, this veneer that people look to traditional media for sensible reporting. They look to traditional media for robust reporting. They look to traditional media for integrity. And that is wrong, in my opinion. That is a mistake to do that. Because I don't believe that those media outlets exist in a vacuum. I don't believe that the media exist without bias. Most people have, everybody has biases. But the fact that their ownership is structured in the way that it is, it means that we are getting the message that the owners want us to get. So in the UK, there are just 3 companies that dominate, and they have 90% of the national newspaper circulation. Those 3 companies are DMG Media, News UK, and Reach. So DMG Media are the publishers of the Daily Mail, the Metro, and News UK, they have the Sun and the Times, and Reach has the Daily Mirror, the Daily Express, and the Daily Star. So this means that these same 3 companies account for more than 40% of the total audience reach of the UK's top 50 online news brands as well. So that gives like a handful of dominant publishers this like unrivaled position for setting the news agenda across print, broadcast, and online formats. And so why is this concerning? Like, why am I bothered? Why am I bothered by these people just trying to get their coin up? Am I just a hater? Yes, I am a hater, but I'm a hater for good reason. Because I believe that we should have journalistic integrity. And I remember growing up how we would look, for example, studying World War II and look at the propaganda that was, being issued. And it was always these other countries that were really behind and couldn't get control of their media. And they just had people spewing out like as a kind of mouthpiece for the government. Or you'd looking at like Chile. And I don't know if they have this on the syllabus anymore, but I remember being, GCSE level, and we do this talking in whispers. And it was about, President Allende and him being killed, and how there was this movement now because people weren't allowed to say things, so they were required to talk in whispers. And more I see this happening here. And so if we're looking at the news that we're getting, what news is that? Like, where is the rigor? Where is the fact? Where is the proof? Where is the evidence? Where are the sources? We don't have that because we have this need, these newspapers have, and these media organizations have, to just be the first. They don't really care whether what they're saying is helpful, whether it's true, or whether this will forward a specific agenda. It just matters that they're the first and they're hoping for this viral hit. So if we go back to it, who owns what? So DMG is owned by Jonathan Harmsworth Viscount Rothmere. I think I said that right, Rothmere. I can never pronounce things, even though I'm in the UK. And he's the chairman and sole owner of the Daily Mail and the General Trust, and the great grandson of the founder of the Daily Mail. So there's something. And so this guy has got money. Like he's Mr. Moneybags, right? He's inherited a peerage, and he's got like an estimated worth of around £1 billion. And despite this, him and his business, they can avoid paying tax because they have non-dom status, and we know that Labour are talking about kind of changing those loopholes. But they've got this non-dom status, and because of offshore company regulations, they're avoiding paying tax. So these are people that directly benefit from an agenda and setting an agenda within the UK. But also, just on top of that, think about that. They're people that benefit from avoiding tax because of, regulation or how policy currently is unfolding. Are they inclined to be people that are pushing a position where richer people or non-dom people pay tax? Would they be inclined to do that, to work against their own interest? I'd guess not. Then we've got those almost caricatural villains, and definitely who I think Succession was based off, the TV series Succession, the Murdoch family. So they're publishers of The Sun and The Times. And also, I think they have News UK, also operates Talk TV, Talk Radio, and Talk Sport. And one of the things that's interesting about Murdoch is they actively and quite openly, especially through The Sun, tend to kind of claim responsibility for installing prime ministers in this country. So when Tony Blair first won under the new Labour government, The Sun had this huge headline that said it was the Sun what won it, or something like that. And so because of this, and we can argue about whether that's true, whether actually they're just really good at backing winners, so that they'll, maybe Murdoch's really good at identifying who would be really good, who's probably going to win, and they back them. Or, was it chicken or egg? Was it the Sun that really kind of pushed forward this agenda and helped these people win? Whatever that is, whatever the case may be, it's actually worked in their favor. And the reason I say that is because whether it's true that the Sun won it, or whether it's true that he's just really good at backing the winner, the prime ministers of successive governments have sought to have this relationship with this media mogul because they're not sure which one came first. And actually what they want is to have media that reports favorably on the things that they do, on the policies that they have, and obviously the actions of their government. And so again, these are not neutral mouthpieces. They definitely have agendas, and they definitely will have that reflected within their reporting. And the final one that I want to speak about, is because it kind of relates to some of the stuff that I was saying in episode 2 with regards to Russia. Now, for my whole childhood, as long as I could remember, we spoke about Russia as this kind of enemy. Yeah. That was reinforced by Hollywood. That was reinforced by, positions that you would hear governments speaking about Russia, and you heard about the Cold War and so on and so forth. And so with the fall of the Iron Curtain, the former USSR, as it were, because I was young enough that it still was called the USSR when I was in primary school or whatever. With the fall of the Iron Curtain, and when Russia, became Russia, and then they had just kind of former Soviet states, there was a lot of wealth that came to Russia. And you hear about this term about Russian oligarchs a lot. And so we just have this idea that, oh, these people are just rich. Like, and I think that's maybe an assumption that's made because in the UK, we tend to have that. In the UK, we have these people that are just rich, right? Like they've always been rich. But that hasn't always been the case in Russia, because a lot of the wealth that they had, particularly after the kind of fall of communism, was linked to the state. So, and it wasn't necessarily, the money and the wealth that they came across wasn't necessarily begotten by pure means, by benevolent means, by, it was by ill means, nefarious means. And so you have these Russian oligarchs where their wealth and their kind of status and their position is inherently tied to the state. And that should elicit within people that deal with these people a certain amount of caution. But as I kind of mentioned in episode 2, that caution was kind of thrown to the wind. And so what we have, for example, is Lebedev Holdings. And there's Evgeny Lebedev, who, by the way, has a peerage from Mr. Boris Johnson. Mr. Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of this country. And Evgeny Lebedev owns the London Evening Standard, and he has the largest share of ownership in the independent online newspaper as well. And why that's interesting is because he was also supportive of Boris Johnson, or the newspaper rather, the Evening Standard was supportive of Boris Johnson when he was running for re-election as mayor. Now, mind you, mayor of London, by the way. Mind you, London is a traditionally and very much a left-leaning city. And so for a conservative, bumbling fool to become mayor, you have to ask, what is the role? Was this chicken or egg? Did the Evening Standard help won it for him? Was it the Evening Standard what won it? Or was it the fact that Boris Johnson was always going to win? Nevertheless, Boris Johnson very much sought to reward Mr. Lebedev when he was giving out peerages. And so now you have Evgeny Lebedev, who is the son of a former FSB agent or KGB agent or whatever they're fashioning themselves as, who owns a very significant news title in this country. And as I said, nothing exists in a vacuum. So I'm going to leave that there. We can probably have a lot more discussions on this, but I'm also aware that if I go missing, at this point, probably no one will look for me. So I'm just going to leave that there. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you've got any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. The misinformationpodcast@gmail.com. As I say all the time, I'm on other social medias at The Reluctant Accountant. So I'm on TikTok for the moment, and I'm also on Instagram. But until next week, see you then. Bye.